Thank you for clicking through to this video, which is number 6 of 12 on the issue of bogged down on two-stroke engines. Here we're going to be looking at fuel vein blockage as a cause, basically the blockage of all the little fuel holes through the carburetor. I have uploaded the full version, the full crash course of the 12 reasons, but I've broken each one down into 12 separate videos to make things a little simpler. But if all's well with the fuel pump diaphragm and going through the key steps, the next thing I'd check for is fuel vein blockage. As we know now, we've got free flow of fuel here on these fuel veins that work their way right round the carburetor and up into the venturi where it's used in the engine. But when that free flow of fuel is interrupted by debris or dirt of some kind, then we've got problems. Just an example, we've got some dirt here that's come out of the fuel tank and somehow come past the fuel filter. Now, although it's only a small piece of dirt and it's not causing any problems here in the fuel line, by the time it's past one of these valve flaps, and if it doesn't get stuck here, it's heading for the fuel vein where it could do. And in fact, that's what's actually happened here. Because this fuel vein is so much smaller, if you like, the orifice is so much smaller than the actual fuel pipe coming from the fuel tank, then a tiny piece of debris can block it. And that can often be a piece much smaller than you can usually see. So this area is now blocked, but the engine's still wanting fuel. So it's still sucking fuel out of the carb. And of course, this is what happens. The carb's cleared out with fuel. So now we've got a problem, and that's a lack of fuel going into the engine. In fact, none at all. So in order for it to get to something like this, the engine would have bogged down and stopped, of course. Now the blockage might not be here, of course, because this is only an illustration. It could be here, or it could be at this point, or any of these points here. If you do suspect this kind of blockage here in the fuel veins, then the best thing to do is strip down the carburetor and blow down the fuel veins with an air line or an air blower, and hopefully then we can remove the blockage. I have come across many situations where the blockage can't be removed doing this, and a common thing nowadays is to use an ultrasonic cleaner that can loosen the dirt first. So you could have that option also. In the past with stubborn blockages, I have put them in boiling water and soap and left them in there for a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes, and then I've had another go with the airline, and sometimes the blockage is removed, and I put that down to obviously the boiling water degrading the debris somehow. But that's just what I've done. Obviously I can't advise you to do the same, but I can just tell you I've done that and it's worked. But if you are going to do that, please be aware that there are sometimes rubber or plastic components on your carburetor that might ruin. We can even get a blockage here at this point, and in my experience, this is one of the more common areas for blockages. This is a metal gauze strainer filter that the fuel passes through on its way up to the venturi, and it's there to remove particles of impurities out of the fuel itself. So this is an area of blockage because of that, and it's the build-up of such particles that cause this blockage. And if the fuel is a little dirty, of course, this will be one of the areas to start blocking up first. But these can be removed and easily replaced. They're generally quite inexpensive and they're easy enough to get hold of. If you just do an internet search with your details of your machine or the details of your carburetor, you should easily get hold of a gauze filter. But in the interest of the blockage there, you can see the result is the same. The fuel's been used above the blockage, and now we're left with no fuel going into the engine and no working engine. Now let's take a look at another area of the carburetor now, and how any deficiencies in that area can cause bog down. I want to focus in on this area here. This is the metering area of the carb. Now if we quickly jump back to small amounts of debris and blockages, we can see that small orifice there underneath the needle valve and its seat. That wouldn't be too difficult to block. And it's vital that the fuel passes through there in order to get above to the metering area. But if we do get a blockage there, then obviously we know we're not going to get any fuel up to the top of the metering area. I've illustrated quite a bit of debris there, but in some cases there might be the tiniest amount of debris, the tiniest piece, and that could get stuck just there inside that very small fuel way there, with the obvious consequences the same as the last point, where fuel isn't going up into the metering area and of course isn't going into the venturi, and it's not available to the engine, and so the engine will have bogged down and stopped. Whereas under correct normal conditions, fuel would have travelled upwards here, under the valve, into the metering area, down through the jets, and into the venturi available for the engine. Other areas prone to blockages are the fuel jets. This particular jet is the high jet, and then the one over to the right of it here is the low jet. And whilst they do have their own obvious functions, they do work harmoniously together and with the main jet to make sure that the right amount of fuel reaches the venturi and of course enters the engine. So as you can imagine, any blockages here can be drastic. So here's the main jet, and let's have a look at the kind of problems that can occur when the main jet gets blocked. But at the moment you can see there that the fuel is coming down the main jet nicely, and it's entering the inlet area of the carb there, so it's entering the venturi. There's plenty of fuel there, atomized, with the air going into the engine. So all well and good at the moment. And now we've got a main jet blockage, and as you can see there, there's no fuel coming out of the main jet at all. The other two jets, the high and low jet, are still adding fuel, but they can't compensate for the main jet, which is where the main of the fuel comes from. And I hope this illustration goes a long way to showing the importance of the main jet, and that the high and low jet are there just to support the main jet and to fine-tune the engine. So this amount of fuel is totally insufficient to support the workings of an engine, particularly a high revving engine. That's if the engine would run at all. So if the engine was running and then a blockage of this kind in the main jet occurred, then the engine would bog down and stop. So let's assume everything's okay with the main jet. Now let's have a look at problems that can occur because of blockages in the high jet. Well, at the moment all's looking well. We've got fuel being drawn out of the high jet there into the venturi, and we've also got support from the main jet of fuel being drawn out there, so all's looking quite well. It's all amounting to a decent air to fuel ratio, which of course equals good running of the engine. So let's imagine the high jet's blocked then. We've got a piece of debris there stuck in the high jet, and that piece stuck there is large enough to stop any fuel coming down, and you can see a different air to fuel ratio now. There's less fuel in with the air. And of course, if there's less fuel going in, the engine revs will die down. And as you can see now, we've got less air going in as well. So there's deficiency in the way the engine's running. The engine's running lower. And although the main jet on its left is still supplying fuel, and so is the low jet on its right, because all three aren't working in sync, there's not a sufficient supply of fuel for the engine. So the engine won't be able to receive a sufficient amount to rev right high. And of course, when we try to do that, when we try to rev high, we're just going to get bogged down, and the engine is most likely to stop. And we'll get the same problem, by the way, if the high screw is screwed right in. As you can see here, there's no debris at all. It's just that someone's reset the high screw too far in, and no fuel can come down into the venturi for the engine. Okay, let's have a look at another scenario. We've got everything working again here. We've got the main jet supplying the fuel and the high and low jets, and that's resulting in a good fuel air mixture in the inlet. So that means obviously we've got a good running engine at this point. But if we take a look now, something's gone wrong. We can see there we've got less fuel in the inlet, and of course if we take a closer look there, we can see that it's the low jet that's screwed right in. So this has been over adjusted. We've got problems there. There's less fuel coming out of the low jet, as you can see, and that's causing the problem. But again, the main jet's working okay, and that's adding fuel, and so is the high jet. But because we've got no fuel supply commitment from the low jet, we're left again with an inferior ratio of fuel to air mixture, and that's what's going to cause problems with running with the engine. And of course, ultimately, when we try and make the engine run to its best, it's going to bog down. I've actually come across times where it bogs down due to the low screw. And although the low screw is associated with fine-tuning low engine revs, when it's screwed in like this, it does cause enough of a problem with the fuel to air mixture to cause bog down. And in fact, I have found this on more than one occasion when I'm actually physically repairing machinery. So in order to avoid this problem, or if you do have this problem, the best thing to do then is when you strip down the carburetors, get an airline, and again squirt the airline right down these jets. And of course it's good to remove the high screw and the low screw completely and squirt some air down there as well. The best thing to do as well, if you can't get rid of the problem then, as I've said before, it might be best to look into ultrasonically cleaning the carb. If it is that you don't want to take it to a repair centre to get it cleaned, ultrasonic cleaners are quite inexpensive nowadays, and a good internet search will bring you a good deal. I myself got one off the internet and it was a good price, and I use it all the time. It was quite cheap and I've never had a problem with it, and it's always served me well, and I use it most days. And when I remove them from the ultrasonic cleaner and blow them out again, I find that I can move debris much better, as I've already mentioned. And of course, they don't just clean carburetors, they clean things like jewellery, so you might find it a worthy investment. Again, thank you so much for watching this video, and please do check out my next video, number 7, on fuel metering diaphragm issues regarding bog down.